Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining from, to this introduction to LeanNow webinar with Randall Benson, brought to you by Swift Kanban from Digite. We will get started here in a minute. Just waiting for a couple of more people to join. In the meantime, let me take you through a quick agenda slide here. We'll start with some introductions and a quick word from the sponsor, Swift Kanban. And then we'll hand over the mic to Randall Benson, who will take us through the introduction to LeanNow. And we'll follow that up with a Q&A session. Hopefully, we will have a good set of questions to help us get this webinar to an invigorating finish and value to all of you. Some housekeeping here. So you should all be able to see a Q&A box on the bottom right of your screens, WebEx screens, and any question that you have, if you could enter those in the Q&A box, we will take them in the order they are received, and we'll try and answer as many of them as possible live here on the webinar. The webinar will be recorded, and the slides and the recording will be made available in a follow-up email within a day or two after the webinar. So you don't have to worry about taking notes or things like that. The slides will be made available. So with that, let me get started with introducing the speaker. Today's speaker is Randall Benson. He's CEO of Benson Consulting. He's a lean consultant and coach, and he's also the author of The Quest Effect. I'll talk a little bit more about him on the next slide. I'm your host. My name is Mahesh Singh. I'm co-founder and senior vice president of product at Digite, the maker of Swift Kanban, and I'll give you a quick introduction to our company and products as well. So Randall is, as he says for himself, self-confessed lean heretic. And I'm sure he's going to talk a little bit more about that in his session. He's a lean consultant, coach, and trainer, and he's worked with a wide variety of companies in a wide variety of industries: manufacturing, distribution, healthcare, government services, insurance, and so on. He's also written the book The Quest Effect, and that has got a pretty good following, and he probably will talk a little bit about that as well. Randall is based in the Seattle area, and we were just talking a little bit earlier, and apparently it's a beautiful morning out there, and so we hope that that has a good impact on our webinar today. And before I hand over to Randall, let me just spend a couple of minutes on talking about Digite and Swift Kanban. Digite Inc. is a software company, a pioneer in web-based collaborative products and solutions, specifically meant for facilitating geographically distributed teams. We headquartered in Mountain View, California, and we have offices in the US and in India. We have over 300,000 users using our products around the world, pretty much. Our products cover Lean Kanban, Agile Application Lifecycle Management, Agile ALM, and Project Portfolio Management. And Swift Kanban is our flagship Lean Kanban product. Yes, and it is being used in some of the concepts that Randall is going to talk about today. Just a quick view of our overall product stack, and as you can see, we have a very comprehensive solution for specifically for technology organizations, but also for any other organization that is really looking to use lean and Kanban-based principles for improving business operations and project delivery. So we do have a lot of capability around implementing lean and agile within your IT and non-IT organizations, and we'd be certainly happy to hear from any of you who might be looking to implement tools or processes in this space in your organization. Just a quick look at some of our key customers, and as I said earlier, we have customers around the world, and in a variety of industries using our products for process improvement, project management, software lifecycle management, and so on and so forth. But also in non-IT areas such as staffing, sales and marketing, and others, where there is need for improving processes and for improving throughput and the quality and delivery of value to customers. So with that short introduction, I'm going to hand over to Randall. So if you can pass on control to Randall, please. So Randall, you have control, and I think you need to probably unmute yourself.
Okay, thanks for helping me find the unmute switch there. I think probably you can hear me now, and I'll start the slide presentation.
Yes.
All right, well, I'd like to welcome you all to the introductory webinar on LeanNow today, and appreciate you logging in from all over the world. Today we're going to talk about a relatively non-traditional approach to implementing Lean in non-manufacturing organizations in particular, but of course some of this can be applied to manufacturing organizations as well. I think some of the areas that I'd like to cover today are to describe what the LeanNow idea is and how it works, and why traditionally becoming lean in non-manufacturing companies has been so difficult, and how an alternative approach can address some of the issues around how long and how difficult and how expensive it's been to implement Lean. How LeanNow works, who can do it and who shouldn't do it, what some of the benefits of LeanNow are, and how we can use LeanNow to eliminate waste in organizations in a different way than we've traditionally done with Lean implementations. So the webinar today is basically about becoming lean, and really I'm trying to address a new breed of lean leaders, the people like the person on the screen here who doesn't wear a hard hat, who doesn't work on the shop floor, and is likely to be considering Lean implementations in healthcare services, government, non-profit organizations, and the like, who have different needs from those people who have implemented Lean traditionally and who created kind of the orthodoxy around Lean and how it should be done. So in my Lean heretic mode, I'm going to suggest a non-orthodox approach today to implementing Lean. So if you haven't started Lean in your organization yet, I hope you'll see a way that you can implement Lean in 30 days or less. If you're already implementing Lean, I hope that you'll see how you can achieve results sooner. And if you're past implementation and doing Lean, chances are you'll see an idea or two that will help you do Lean better in your organization. So just a quick touch on the definition of Lean. My definition basically is creating and sustaining an uninterrupted flow of customer value by involving everyone in the elimination of waste in every form. This is a little different than the traditional definition, which is only the second part of that definition. And I think that's important because the traditional definition actually influences how we're trying to implement Lean in organizations, and is actually causing some of the problems that I'll talk about here in a moment. So when I say implementing Lean, I specifically mean managing your daily operations with Lean principles and being able to continuously improve your operations using Lean as well. So it doesn't mean that you've eliminated all the waste in your organization. It doesn't mean that you've cleared, and organized your entire workplace. But it does mean that you decided probably to be Lean and are acting accordingly. And so what I'm going to talk about today is how to avoid that traditional mode of first having to do a bunch of stuff before you can become Lean, because that's the path to disappointment. I really want to talk about how you can become Lean now, and then use your Lean capability to do all the things that are done up at the front end of too many Lean implementations. And I'll try to be more specific about that in a few slides here. So I'm assuming that if you're here on this webinar, you're interested in becoming Lean, or you are becoming Lean, and you're probably one of these organizations in the middle of this slide. Certainly some of these ideas work for non-manufacturing as well, but what I really try to do here is create a purpose-built approach for non-manufacturing organizations to do Lean that is much different than what manufacturing organizations do when they do Lean. And so my goal today is really to help you or help make Lean easy for you so you can create a Lean success story in your non-manufacturing organization. The problem, as I see it, and I've worked in it for over 20 years in the area of Lean, as Mahesh said, in many different kinds of organizations, is that it takes too long to implement Lean. Often takes months, even years to implement Lean in large organizations. They're spending many tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to even a few $1 million in services to help them implement Lean in their organizations. They're spending endless months on waste removal before they get to actually being Lean. They're encountering disruption and fatigue and loss of sustained support as a result of how long and how disruptive their Lean implementations are becoming. And it's really draining the resources of the organization as well as creating disappointing results. A recent survey indicated that only 2% of the organizations who have tried Lean in the United States, in any case, are really happy with the results that they're getting or satisfied with the results. So obviously, even though we're spending a lot of time up front in the implementation process and a lot of resources, we're not always getting to the results that we want. The way I see it is we're limited by the factory floor approach that was created over 50 years ago at Toyota, and that factory floor approach has really put us in this tyranny of the orthodox and the orthodox approach to implementation. I've worked a lot in factories, and I've learned the traditional approaches and have used them for many years. And a lot of what happens in a factory is about physical barriers to doing Lean and having to move machines, having to eliminate storage areas so we have visibility, to create manufacturing cells, to remove large machines and replace them by several small machines. And so there's a lot of upfront, very physical, tangible work to do when we're doing Lean in manufacturing companies that just isn't at all the same as what we see in high-tech services, healthcare, and other kinds of organizations. And yet we still try to implement Lean in the very same way with the very same techniques that we used on the factory floor and that were developed over 50 years ago. And so I think it's time now to really rethink that and to challenge the assumptions that we have regarding how to implement Lean. And so that's what I want to do a little bit more of today. So orthodox Lean basically says in order to create flow, we need to first eliminate waste. We need to first reorganize or organize the workplace. If we're spread out, we need to co-locate in a small area so that we can work together. And we need to make the status of the flow visible to anyone who walks through the plant. And so flow comes later in the implementation process as opposed to the beginning. And so what I'm suggesting is we need to turn that around and start talking about doing flow first, which I'll get to here in a second. The other thing I see quite often in non-manufacturing organizations that are attempting Lean is that they've gotten stuck in this forever loop of waste reduction, of Kaizen blitzes, Kaizen events, accelerated waste reduction. And they believe that due to the definition that they learned of Lean, which was involving everybody in the elimination of waste in every form, that this is what Lean means, to do waste reduction cycle after cycle after cycle. And that is not how you get to Lean, and it's not the proper definition of Lean to use, but it often traps people in this continuous year after year loop of doing waste reduction. Many of those waste reductions being good, but not going to the bottom line results for the organization, and also not getting to actually managing the flow of the organization on a daily management basis. Here's an example of a hospital corporation. Ted is the guy who's responsible for the Lean implementation there. And when I met Ted, he'd been going for about 1.5 years at that point. He spent about $1.5 million on consulting fees to that point. These are the kinds of things he'd been working on. So you can see that he was plenty busy. They had lots of things going on. They were reorganizing the workplace, doing improvement blitzes, value stream mapping. They'd gone on factory tours. They'd taken their whole team up to another city to go through a week of lean training, process walks. They created a lean office and set up project management. They were doing all kinds of things, and yet after a year and a half, not one single organization within that hospital corporation was actually managing with lean principles on the front line. And I think Ted probably had another year to go and another $1 million before he was going to get to the point where people were actually managing on the front line of his organization with lean principles. And so I see this as a quintessential example of the danger of starting with the manufacturing approach to lean and front-ending your lean implementation with a lot of activities that I don't think you actually need to go through. I think what the desired state should look like is we should be able to implement lean very rapidly in 30 days or less. It should be low cost. We should use the flow to target waste removal instead of getting stuck in that continuous loop of forever waste removal. The lean should be smooth and easy for the organization, not disruptive. Should generate quick results that actually the customer can see and that we can see on our bottom line within a few months, and should be so easy that we don't have to worry about sustained support. It's easy to keep support from the organization for a month or more, as opposed to many months and many years. And I think, very importantly, it needs to be available to smaller organizations. Many small organizations feel that they just don't have the resources to implement lean, and they've basically been locked out of the opportunity. So I think if we can reduce the front-end effort and the costs and make this easy, then those smaller organizations will have access to lean. So lots of organizations have been capitalizing their massive investment in lean implementation and then spreading it out over future years. And my feeling is that we should be able to get a payback on our lean implementation investment right away. One of my friends in another manufacturing organization, non-manufacturing organization, a high-tech organization, said that if they could just retain 2 or 3 more customers as a result of implementing lean, they could pay for the entire implementation from the savings on those customers. And I think that's the kind of opportunity we're looking at. So to summarize, I think lean should be very easy to do and should take less than 30 days if you're in a non-manufacturing organization to get to the point where you're actually managing with lean principles at the front line of your organization. So to do that, we need, as I mentioned, a purpose-built process that works for non-manufacturing organizations, and we also need to use current technologies. As I mentioned, the lean implementation model, the orthodox model, is about 50 years old and doesn't use current technologies like electronic virtual Kanban boards and the like. So we don't need to use cutting-edge technologies, but we need to update to the technologies that we already are using in our business and having our implementation use those same technologies that we already use. So, you know, in my manufacturing days, we needed to remove obstacles to flow and uproot machines and create manufacturing cells, remove obstacles to visibility, change machine setups, etc., that we just don't need to do in high-tech and service organizations. So the solution, as I see it, and been experimenting with this now for several years, is to do flow first. Instead of doing all that front-end work and then eventually getting to flow, strive to do flow at the outset of the lean implementation, and then use that flow and the lean tools that go with it to manage daily operations in your business with lean principles. And then use the flow to target the waste that is actually blocking the flow. So if we have flow and we can see the flow, we can ask ourselves, what's limiting our ability to get more flow? What are the rate limiting factors that keep us from delivering more value to our customers more quickly? And we're actually using flow to target waste, and that way we can target just the waste that will create value for the end user and also go to the bottom line for our organization. And this will allow us, as we reduce the waste, this will allow us to streamline the flow. So we can start with a fairly dirty flow, that's basically what we have today, and then use the flow itself to create the waste reduction that drives an improvement in our flow over time. So we move from this kind of dirty flow to a very clean, streamlined flow as we do process improvement. And I already mentioned the importance of creating immediate end-user benefits instead of waiting for a year or two, like Ted at the Hospital Corporation had to do before the end users could actually see the benefits of the Lean implementation. So the big idea, as I see it, is if you want to do Lean now, is to do flow first. So start with flow and then use the flow itself to identify the waste you want to eliminate, to identify where you need to reorganize the workplace, and to make the status of your flow visible to everybody. Even if you can't see it in the tangible workplace, you can see it represented on a Kanban board or other method to visualize your flow. So that's kind of the idea of Lean now, and again, a non-traditional approach to implementing manufacturing or implementing Lean specifically for non-manufacturing organizations. So Lean now is a series of simple steps. You kind of compare this to the steps on the earlier slide that Ted was working on, but it's really quite simple. First, we need to spend a short amount of time understanding the Lean principles that we'll need to use to manage with Lean on the front line of our organization, and then pick a value stream and map that value stream so that we understand what processes are involved to deliver value to the customer, and then build a virtual flow and set the Q limits for that flow so that we can actually use that as the management tool to manage the delivery of value to our customer. Implement pull and manage and then use the pull to manage the flow. So by implementing pull, we keep our work in process at the same level all the time, and that allows us to have predictable delivery times. And then finally, use the flow to eliminate waste. And when we eliminate waste, we'll be able to streamline the flow and continually improve this at a very rapid rate. So in the 2 years that would take us, it will take Ted to implement his manufacturing approach to Lean, we could have been streamlining our flow for those same 2 years and been way ahead of the process. So the first step, again, is to understand Lean principles, and specifically the principles that apply to non-manufacturing organizations and the ones that we'll need early on in order to manage with those Lean principles on the front line. And it doesn't mean sending your staff off to another city for 5 days of training. That's kind of one of the wasteful parts of using the manufacturing model. What we've done in the past, and what seems to work really well, is to use a one-day Lean office simulation that creates the ahas that we just can't get in the classroom setting. So here's a kind of supposed to be a picture of this conference room setting, and this group is using a game that's based on office operations to simulate the transformation from a traditional office setting into a Lean flow setting. And these guys will get amazing results. It's a simple game. It goes through 4 phases, and again, we're trying to show them what the transformation might look like. Here's part of an actual scorecard from the simulation, and you can see on the scorecard I've only used the first phase and the 4th phase. I've taken the middle ones out, but you can see that they've reduced their throughput time 7-fold, cut the rush time, the minimum time to process work, in half. They've cut work in process by 9 times. Productivity is skyrocketed by a huge amount in this example, going from taking 112 seconds per file to just 26 seconds per file to do the same work with the same number of people. Customer backlog has been reduced by 75%. Quality has improved dramatically. And I love the last one on here, which is the perceived effort as reported by the people on the team that was going through the simulation went from very difficult to very easy over those 4 phases. So they're doing the same work, doing it more productively, and also reporting that the work is dramatically easier, which also reflects the reality of implementing Lean in organizations as well. Almost no one wants to go back after they've experienced how much easier it is to work in the Lean mode than in the previous mode. So, and the last part of this, of course, is taking ideas from the simulation and applying those to your own business process. So probably in a day, a half a day for the simulation and a half a day to talk about how that maps in to the group's business processes, we can accomplish what would take a week to do in traditional training models. And also, we've done it in a fun and experiential way. So that's what we want to do, is get the aha effect right away so people can say, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I recall a bank president who was actually in one of these simulations actually stood up and said, I want that now. And it actually led to a change in the way they processed the home loans in their bank, following the principles that they saw in the game. So others, need to explore how it would fit in their organization. It might not be so much of a perfect analogy, but everybody gets insights from the game about how they could use Lean principles. And the second step is to really map the value stream that we want to use for our Lean implementation. So a value stream is kind of an end-to-end flow of value, utility, benefit for the end user, and it's a group of processes that link together. Examples would be employee intake processes, customer onboarding, outpatient infusion in a hospital setting, approving building plans in a government setting, selling long-term care insurance online in kind of a web-enabled setting. Lots of different value streams are amenable to the Lean approach. And there are usually several in every organization, so the organization will want to look at which ones they want to try first. And also, some things don't actually have end users. We call those core processes, and we can also use the same approach with core processes, such as HR processes or payroll processes or things like that we use for value streams. It'll work about the same way. This is a picture of an actual value stream map that one of my clients worked with. It's a very high-level map of what the process flow looks like. It's got a lot of gobbledygook on it, but most of that is collecting data about each of the processes that we'll use when we implement Lean. You'll notice at the bottom of the diagram, there's a little time chart across the bottom, a timeline, which tells us basically how long it takes from the time we identify the customer need until we're able to fulfill that need. So in this case, it was plan approvals for a government agency. So it's really important to take the time to first map on paper what your flow looks like, because unlike factories, service organizations can be kind of difficult to see the flow and see the work product. So here's an example from a client again of what we started with. So if we took the old manufacturing approach, we'd clean all this up before we ever thought about doing flow. But now we have the technology so that we can do flow first, and we can do Lean now, and then we can work toward improving these after we've got the flow working. But this raises all kinds of questions as you look at these pictures, like, where's the work piece here? How much work in process do we have, and how much of that is work in process as opposed to some other kind of paperwork? What's the backlog for the flow that we're interested in? Where is it blocked? What of all that stuff sitting around is waiting for some kind of response from somebody, and who's following up on that response? So lots of questions that we need to answer about Lean are really very difficult to answer in service settings. Now, these may be kind of extreme, but still I think they give examples of how much difference this looks than a factory setting. So, and you can look at the cubicle area there and say, what's the flow for this value stream? I really don't see any flow there. All the work seems to be going to people's desks and being worked at in personalized, work areas. Where's the customer stuff? If the customer called, could I tell the customer when their work would be ready for them? Where's the staff? Wow, look at that. The staff's out in the field, not sitting at a desk. In fact, that's so common in service organizations that, in non-manufacturing organizations, that the people that work on the same flow aren't co-located together at all, like on the shop floor. Instead, they're located in different cities, in different areas, in different offices, in different time zones, and still need to work together to deliver the value to the customer. The third thing is to build a virtual flow and set the Kanban limits, or set the queue limits, I should say. Those words are interchangeable. And the idea of being able to visualize the flow and limit the amount of work in process through setting the queue limits are the two primary ideas behind using Lean in non-manufacturing organizations. It doesn't have to be a virtual flow. It could be a physical flow of actual files. It could also be part of your online web-enabled delivery system. But for most organizations, actually having a visual virtual flow that they can see is the easiest way for them to get started. Okay, so once we have the value stream map built, and we can start building the Kanban board, which is the board in the lower part of your screen here, and the processes from the value stream map then become something very close or exactly equivalent to the columns on the Kanban board. So what we're going to do is use those little cards on that electronic Kanban board that you see to move the work across the board in the same way it would have moved through the value stream map. So that's why we built the value stream map, is because it tells us how to build the Kanban board. And it shows us the work piece, and it shows us the flow, and also now we're going to also start setting the Kanban limits, the work in process queue limits. So a little picture of a Kanban board. Here's a bigger picture. This is a government agency Kanban board. Those of you who work in IT or are familiar with IT and have seen Kanban boards used for Agile purposes will notice that this board looks much different in that there's many columns instead of a few columns, and the columns are specific instead of generalized as they would be in Agile project management. So this isn't the entire process. The actual process has 16 steps, but this is the first part of the Kanban board that we're looking at now. And the cards on the Kanban board, the yellow and blue cards, are actually associated with real work. In this case, those cards mean rats and garbage. The cards that are yellow are rodent cards for rat complaints, and the cards that are blue are garbage cards for complaints about illegal dumping in the county that this health organization serves. And then the cards move across the board from the left to the right. That's how the flow works, and we move those cards as we complete the work. The pictures on the cards are the pictures of the people who are working on the card at the moment. If you pull a card into the next lane and you're the person who grabbed it and pulled it, the picture will change to you to show that now you're working on the card and not the person who was working on it in the last column. So it's a very cool way to get into Lean right away. We can do everything with this Kanban board that we could have done if we'd set up the physical, tangible flow of files or work pieces in an organization, but we can get to it right away and start managing with Lean principles before we've actually attacked the mess that we saw in those earlier photos of the actual workplace. When you do flow first and set up the Kanban board right away, what we're striving for basically is minimum viable flow, which really means it can be ugly. And this guy on the screen here is not proud of it. It's not something you want to trot out to your Lean conference and show them how great you are. But it's the minimum you need in order to start managing with Lean principles. And then we're going to do the cleanup of the flow at the back end of the process rather than doing the cleanup at the front end of the process before we even start managing with Lean principles. And this works so much better because now we can use the flow itself and our understanding of the flow to target the parts of the flow that we need to clean up and improve in order to make it work better. So we found that we can get bottom line results much faster by doing flow first as opposed to doing waste reduction and workplace reorganization and the things like that first in order to get the flow someday in the future. Okay. So the fourth step is to implement pull and manage the flow. Pull keeps us from getting our work in process clogged up with work that we can't actually work on, and it's just plain good hygiene. We want to keep the amount of work in process at a steady point because that lets us predict how long it takes to deliver value to the customer. And it's unlike the old traditions, kind of, some people call it the constipation cure, that says if you put enough work in process in the front end, something's bound to come out the other end sooner or later. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is that kind of thinking about overstuffing the work process, the flow, with a bunch of work in process we can't actually work on. And so it kind of works like this. You can see the arrows at the bottom of the screen. The person in the second column reaches over and pulls that case 81 back into their area, and now they're assigned the case. And as long as it doesn't exceed that limit at the top, they had 4 cards. They have a limit of 6 in that area, so they can take 2 more cards. So yep, they can pull that case 81 into their area and start working on it. That's the idea of the pull system. And when they finish, as in case 94 there, that case then can be moved down into the ready to pull area, and the next person that's going to be doing processing the letter can pull it into their area. So you notice we didn't push it to the next person. We just said it's ready to pull. When somebody downstream is ready for it, it's available, and you can take it and move it to your area. That's the idea of using the Kanban board to set up queue limits and to set up a pull process and to keep our flow manageable. If we have a backlog of work that doesn't fit on the board at this time, then we keep it in a separate area called the backlog, and then a supervisor generally would release the backlog onto the board. So if we have more work than we can handle at the time, the best method is not to put it into work in process, but to keep it in a separate backlog at the front of the process and then release it there. If we do that, as opposed to moving the work into process where it requires constant statusing and kind of overloads and gets in the way and causes extra handling, we found that we can actually just about double the amount of throughput for our process by using a backlog as opposed to using the overstuffing the work in process approach. Call that the push approach. So the question often is asked, so what do managers do in a process like this? Well, they actually do less running around telling people what to do and intervening and over managing the process, and instead can sit back and work on the things that are really important for managers and supervisors to do. First, they've probably been involved in establishing the queue limits, the work in process limits that the board uses to manage how much work in process flows through. They're the ones that often release the backlog from the backlog area onto the board. They assist when limits are hit, when those queue limits are hit. Maybe somebody needs extra help or some kind of support, so a supervisor gets involved there. They definitely support the improvement projects that make the flow better in the future. They help the team get what the team needs, rebalance the flow if improvements are made and we need to shift people around now, and also track the metrics and keep track of the performance, especially the customer performance that's happening with the flow. So managers have a different kind of work. One example I recently dealt with in government, the person was very controlling and found that they had to change their behavior more into a supportive role once the Kanban board was working, and they had to learn how to use the information from the Kanban board to know what to do and how to support their team. And the team basically ran their process without the supervisor for the most part. So they became self-managing as a result of being able to use lean principles. The next step and final step is to eliminate waste and streamline the flow. So oftentimes, as I mentioned, we were stuck with this waste elimination loop at the beginning of the implementation. Now what we're saying is let's go ahead and set up flow before we eliminate waste, understanding that we're going to create a pretty ugly flow, and then we'll improve that flow over time eliminate the waste over time using the flow itself to identify what kind of waste and where the waste is that we want to eliminate. So we're looking for incompleteness of information, overproduction, excessive movement and transportation, errors and quality problems, and things like that would be the kind of waste that we would want to identify using the flow by asking a simple question: what's limiting the flow today? What could we attack that would actually allow us to have more flow and faster flow in our organization? So the waste blocks flow, and we can identify using the flow what waste can be removed over time. We do that with traditional plan, do, check, act improvement cycle goes back to Deming and Schuhart in the 1940s. It's still a very reliable process, an experimental process, and a spiral of ever more ambitious improvements that allow us to continuously and forever improve our processes and make our flow work better over time. So my feeling is that we should get to this as fast as we can and use flow to identify what we should be working on, as opposed to just trying to attack all waste and try to boil the ocean with waste improvement before we get started. So before we looked at a board that was for actually tracking our work as we built it, we can also use another kind of board. This is an improvement board, and still use a Kanban board for this too. So here are the improvement ideas. This is just a mock-up. And you can see the plan, do, check, act part in the middle of the board. So in this case, we're actually having our improvement go through the plan, do, check, act process and keeping track of what improvements we're working on. Once we finish the plan, do, check, act process and decide to submit the idea for approval, there's a submit column and then finally a completed column where we've either completed the work or we can put it in the non-approved. There's a couple different approaches for how to do multiple plan, do, check, act cycles on the same idea. Either we just move the card back to the first step and start the second process, or we start a new card under the ready and reinsert the second round there. But we expect that this would be a circular, iterative process to create the improvements that we're looking for. And then once we make the improvement, this is the cool part, is we take that last approved improvement on the improvement board, and now we can use that to lower the Kanban limit. You can see it was 15. We had 9 cards of the 15 maximum. We can now cut that 15 maximum down to a maximum of 10, and that's how we reflect the improvements that we've made back into the flow. And going from 15 to 10 is the maximum limit will actually make the flow faster and allow us to meet customer expectations sooner and with less cost and disruption. So we like the idea of using the flow itself to identify the improvements and then using the improvements to reduce the or to streamline the flow. So my question to you would be, would you be able to apply these 5 simple steps in your organization, going from understanding the lean principles to picking a value stream and mapping it, building virtual flow and setting Kanban limits, implementing flow and managing the flow on the front line, and then using that to begin eliminating waste and streamlining flow, which will be a continuous forever process in the last step. And being able to get to that point within about 30 days or less after beginning the process. So what I believe we need is an alternative to the long, expensive, and unproductive lean implementations that I've seen in so many non-manufacturing organizations, and instead need to move to a process where we can rapidly go from 0 to lean, and by rapidly, I'm thinking less than 30 days. We think it could theoretically doable in a week, but allowing for time to just absorb the changes, probably 30 days is a reasonable amount of time. So again, going from long, expensive, unproductive lean implementations to a LeanNow approach. So the idea of LeanNow then is basically starting with flow first, using the virtual Kanban boards to allow us to do that flow first without having to go do a lot of workplace reorganization and waste reduction. And then using the Kanban boards and the flow to identify where we want to target waste for elimination. So in the early manufacturing days, we'd use the value stream map itself to target areas of waste, and then we'd have many projects within an area. And after we worked on those projects, we moved to a different area of the value stream map and worked there. All this before ever doing management of flow on the front line. So now we're saying use the flow itself instead of the value stream map, we'll use the value stream flow itself to identify and target waste. Removing the waste allows us to tighten the flow, and tightening the flow is where we get those awesome outcomes, both for customers and for the bottom line of our organization. And by awesome outcomes, I mean reducing throughput time by 75%, in many cases, increasing productivity by 30 to 100%, reducing errors and other quality problems by 90%. So we're talking about very significant improvements. You probably all seen those advertised in the Lean improvement process. So I won't bore you with all the potential outcomes, but they're realizable in a very short period of time if we start with flow and we use the flow and the management of the Lean management of that flow to identify and eliminate waste in the future. So the method, I call this method LeanNow. It's just a name I picked so I didn't have to talk about all the steps every time I brought it up. It's a non-traditional, some people would say a heretical approach to implementing lean manufacturing specifically for non-manufacturing organizations. And speaking of heretical, I do recall sitting a couple months ago with the head of a large lean consultancy, very entrenched in the manufacturing approach. And the person got kind of mad when I described the process and said, "You can't do that. That violates some of the very tenets of Lean, and it's not acceptable." And so we had a discussion about how using modern technology, for example, the Kanban board, we're able now to challenge some of the long-standing traditions of Lean and use a different approach to getting there. And at that, I will turn this back over to Mahesh and set us up for answering some questions.
Thank you, Randall. That was an excellent webinar, and I think I personally think it's one of the sort of easiest ways to take on something like implementation of Lean, which has been traditionally viewed as a long and sometimes thankless process, and perhaps giving very little results. So in fact, I wanted to start off with a question from my side, that why has this not been done earlier? Have there been earlier efforts to have some sort of an accelerated Lean implementation, and how do you think LeanNow is going to help organizations do it much better than before?
I think, Mahesh, the reason that it hasn't been done earlier is actually due to the dogma and orthodoxy around Lean itself. There's a very strong Lean movement, a core of true believers who are kind of the keepers of the truth when it comes to Lean. And I think Lean actually became kind of solidified in the 1990s with a couple key books like, oh no, I'm going to forget what the names of the books are, Lean Thinking and another book. But basically the tenets of Lean were laid down at that point, and I don't think they're being challenged enough today. So it's interesting that the original founder or the developer of the Lean principles at Toyota didn't want the Lean or the Toyota method written down and published because he was afraid that that it would become calcified and it would become kind of solidified, and therefore there'd be no more innovation. And I think in many ways his fears came true. Toyota did publish their model a few years later in the 1970s, and by the 1990s, the manufacturing approach to Lean became the approach to Lean. And I just don't think enough people are challenging that approach.
Right, got it. So we've got a bunch of great questions here. So let me take up the first one from Susan, and her question is: traditional Lean promises sustainability. Is this approach, is the LeanNow approach sustainable?
Definitely, it's sustainable for a couple of reasons. One, lots of the sustainability issues with Lean actually came from the very long implementation process that preceded the ability to get to Lean management on the front line. And the second thing is that, and this comes out of the area of integral systems, is that when you can achieve a change of state where you're actually continually using the new process, then it becomes sustainable. The times when it's not sustainable is when we kind of can create a level change that lasts for a while, but then we can't hold it and we slip back the other way and we go back to the level change, the next level, and then slip back again. So I think that by being able to manage with lean principles on the front line, we've created a fundamental change of state at that point that changes the whole way we manage in our organizations with lean. And I think that creates sustainability. Now, one of the issues that people have with this approach is that is the islands of lean issue. So it comes back from the 1980s in the manufacturing days where we'd create lean in a particular area, and people would point out that, well, that's great, you've got lean there, but the results didn't go to the bottom line because it's not linked into the rest of the pieces of the organization. So to address that, we've actually tried to look at value streams, end-to-end delivery of value, and not pieces of that value stream, so that even though we're not doing it in the whole organization, we are looking at the entire value stream, so we're not getting that islands of lean problem. And the LeanNow process can be used in multiple places in serial or concurrently in order to build up lean capability throughout the organization. But so far, what I've seen is it's been very sustainable.
Awesome, awesome. And I guess once people have gone through the 30-day process, I guess that throws up a range of possibilities of where you want to go from there, and I guess that creates its own sort of a roadmap of how you want to continue with it and continue to improve.
I think so. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was gonna go on to the next question, but go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt your thought process there.
I'm fine. Let's just go to the next question.
All right. So Brian had a question on the scoreboard slide that he showed earlier. And I don't know if you need to refer back to that. I might want to transfer control back to you. But if you can remember the slide, then his question is on the scoreboard slide between phases 1 and 4. Was the process implemented after each phase before the next phase evaluation, or was it one session to get from phase 1 to phase 4?
It was one half-day session to get from phase 1 to phase 4. So we did the 4 transformations in the same session. And so we started out with kind of a traditional office setting, and then we created kind of we created a real basic flow, but with no work in process Kanban control type approach, otherwise still using the old management techniques. Then the third phase, we created Kanban limits, and we started to use lean management principles. And then the fourth phase, we refined that some more. So that's how it went through the phases over the simulation.
Okay, great. A couple of questions from Raka Rao. So Raka says, first off, thank you for the presentation. Say for new product development cycle, is this similar to setting visual management to monitor progress at toll gates, identifying opportunities and driving improvements? Even so, just mapping the flow with Muda does not necessarily drive improvements. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly agree that mapping the flow and identifying the Muda or the waste alone won't get you to significant improvements. It's actually eliminating the waste that is the rate limiting factor in the flow, in my opinion, that makes the big difference. So that's what we're trying to get to quickly is to find out what waste is blocking the flow. And that's quite a bit different than doing the process walks with a list of the 7 wastes and trying to identify wastes in different areas, and then making making Kaizen blitzes to remove that waste. That's kind of the traditional model that we're trying to avoid here. I think another part of this question, if I understood you correctly, is this similar to product development approaches? And it looks similar in many ways. I see product development as usually using, if it looks like this, it would be using agile project management approaches. And Agile project management and using Kanban boards for Lean looks quite similar, but under the surface, the Kanban board is used in a different way. There's many more processes, and it's a continual flow with work, not projects, but actual customer input going onto the backlog and then being released onto the Kanban board. It works quite a bit the same, and a lot of the principles are similar, but it's not exactly like project management. It's more like process flow management using Kanban boards.
Okay, and Raka had a follow-up question. I suspect you might have answered it, but her question is it like making current state visual stream mapping visible and using it with queues to run the current state?
Very much so. So in traditional value stream mapping, we start with the current state, and then we move from the current state to the future state while still in the planning mode. We may be doing some Kaizen blitzes at that point. So what we're doing here instead is going from the current state, we're actually implementing the current state on the Kanban board, and then using the Kanban board instead of the value stream map to develop improvements to move us toward the future state. That's not to say we wouldn't have an improvement project where the team uses a value stream map to create a bit, like a big picture of what we could transform into as a future state. That might be an improvement, but we wouldn't wait to do that until we were using the Kanban board to, which reflects the current state in order to move toward a future state. Boy, am I talking in circles, or does that make any sense?
I think it made sense to me. Hopefully, Raka also found the answer useful. A couple of questions from Melanie. The first one is there an optimal team size for Lean Kanban implementations?
That's a good question because, of course, in Agile software development, there is an optimal team size. And no, there's not an optimal team size here because we'll get whatever people actually work in the process now in the organization. It isn't a team like a project team. It's more like the group that does the delivery of the service. And that team could be large or small. You really don't know. I think the most effective work groups are still in that 5 to 7 to 12 area. Just like they would be for a project, but many work groups involve more people, and if they do, we just accommodate those more people. And so part of the improvement might be as we lower the Kanban levels and streamline the flow, we could ask ourselves, do we need so many people in the value stream as we have now?
Yeah, that is a great question. It gets asked all the time, especially in the context of IT projects and operations as well. She had another question. Do you have any recommended methods on establishing WIP limits? And again, that's a great question as well.
I love that question. Yeah, for manufacturing companies, there's formulas for establishing WIP limits. The best methods I've been able to find is to guess in non-manufacturing areas. So usually I go out on the initial setup with the team and just ask them, so if we had 10, would the downstream work area start running out of work? What if we had 5? Would that still work? And I just try to talk to the team about what they think would work. And I also explain the principles of the WIP limits are to buffer one step from the other, and the more variation we have in those steps, between the two steps, the more WIP limit we need, and that we want the WIP to go almost to 0 sometimes, and so if it isn't getting close to 0, but it's only dropping down to 10 or 20, then we know we'll have too much. We know we have too much, and then let them just kind of change the WIP limits as they start experiencing how the system works, and with the supervisor's help, try to press to lower those limits over time. But no, I don't use a formula. I usually use just the best common sense of the people that are actually doing the work.
And one of the things that I have seen some of our customers do is start with in the number of people that are working on each stage of the value stream. So if you have half a dozen developers in the coding phase of a value stream, you might start with WIP limit of 6, and then to play around with that depending on how much work is actually getting through. Like you said, experiment with it. So there's a number of resources in a service organization seems to be one sort of common way to start, and then work from there.
I love that. Yeah, I like just guessing at the WIP limits using some not wild guesses, but informed guesses, and then turn on the system and see what happens, and then make the adjustments after you watch the system run.
Absolutely. So we have come to the top of the hour. In fact, we are a minute over, and I think we are out of time for questions. Any other questions that have not been answered, we will respond to those in the follow-up email that we will send with this webinar. Along with that, we will send links to all the people to download the slides as well as to listen to a recording of the webinar. So Randall, first of all, I want to thank you very much for a great presentation. I think a lot of people have struggled with implementing Lean and really making it a sustainable success. And I think you've given everyone a formula here to start anew, to try and get to that agility and delivery of value that everybody looks for. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be on the webinar today and to help talk about the questions that were raised. That was a lot of fun.
Absolutely, and to all the participants today, we had really great participation and some great questions, and thank you all for taking the time to attend this webinar, and we hope to see you in future. We have several webinars planned as part of the LeanNow series, and we hope to see many of you here. If you have any questions, as you can see on the screen, we have the websites for the topics that we talked about and the emails. So please feel free to reach out to both Randall and to us at SWIFT Kanban with any follow-up questions. Thanks again, and have a great rest of the day wherever you are.